us tonight. And in his honor and of the Jewish holidays, I'm even wearing my dress Maccabi polo tonight. Just want to say that. So welcome, Rabbi Darren. I'd like to ask you, when and why did you decide to become a rabbi?
Well, that's a good question. And I'm really happy to be with everybody tonight. I want to say hi to Marshall. Marshall, it's great to see you. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to everybody. I went to UC Santa Cruz in California, and I played men's volleyball there for a couple of years. When I graduated, I was geared up, ready to travel across the country because I had never been to the East Coast. This is back in 1994. And about 2 days before my trip across the country was about to set, my sister called me from Camp Swig, and she said, Darren, the camp director just quit, and camp starts in 3 days. Would you come and be the camp director? And I had spent a lot of years at camp growing up as a kid, and so when she called me, I thought, this is terrific. I had to spend a summertime with my sister. What could be better? And so I went to camp, and that summer I met a bunch of young people about my age who had just returned from their year abroad in Jerusalem, studying for their first year of rabbinical school and cantorial school. I thought, this is a terrific group of people. I feel really aligned with them. And so one thing led to the next. I spent a couple years living in Israel, and then after that decided to apply to Hebrew Union College, which is the Reform Seminary. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that before I even knew about Maccabiah USA, I played in the Maccabi youth sports, the JCC competitions. So I was a basketball player in high school. So in 1988, I was playing for the Los Angeles team that went to Chicago. And that was a powerful, powerful experience in terms of my own Jewish identity development. So those were a couple of formative kind of external experiences. Internally, my family is not particularly religious. My father's a dentist. My mother's a social worker. So just kind of being in our family because of what they did. You know, my mom was a real caring person, very compassionate. And my dad was, he was a little bit more scholarly and scientific. And those two influences, set into me this interest both in serving people and also in higher learning. So those were some formative influences. And then, it was a little bit of a shock when I told my parents that I was going to apply to rabbinical school. But luckily, I had a really close friend who was over at the time, and he said, Darren, I really never thought that of all people that you would end up being a rabbi, but you always did look good in a yarmulke.
That's funny. So let me ask you, in your journey, what has been your most challenging moment and your most rewarding moment as a rabbi?
Well, the greatest moments of reward are when you can see that the light has been turned on in somebody else's life by Judaism. I don't see myself really as a priest or a prophet. I just see myself in the role of a rabbi as a guide. And Judaism can speak for itself. But when you present it in a way where it really has a moment for someone to be turned on, not necessarily only to Judaism, but how Judaism can kind of inspire their lives towards well-being and positivity, and you see them nod their head, or you can see it in their eyes that something really struck them on a deep level. That's a very powerful experience to have. I would say that some of the more difficult moments, or the most difficult moment, has to do with, let me give you an example. This goes back actually to 1997. This will be something that we all share in common because this is a story of what happened when I was an athlete and we were in Israel together. So that was the year of the bridge collapse. And that was a great shock to everybody. It was a trauma that we were all experiencing together. And the World Union decided that we would continue with the games, but they also decided that we would delay the start of the games and that we would meet in Latroon to have a memorial service. And I learned through the grapevine that a lot of the different delegations made attendance to that ceremony optional. So I would say that the difficult moments of being a rabbi are when my values collide with others, and it's difficult to find alignment in what I believe are appropriate ways to observe participating in peoplehood. And that filters its way down into all different things, but it usually has to do with a values clash.
So I presume a very important part of what you do is consoling people on a regular basis. And I was the beneficiary of that when my mom passed away a year and a half ago, and you were nice enough to preside at her service and were very positive in consoling me. So now, as you can imagine, the last 7 months of upheaval with the coronavirus and fires in California and storms in the South nonstop, everybody is now just in a state of sort of depression, disappointment, uncertainty. And as we move forward, how do you suggest that people deal with this going forward? Because we're still uncertain as to when we'll return to normalcy.
I think that's right. I think that as a global people, we are all experiencing coronavirus in a different way, and it's challenging us. I think that as Jewish people, we more than any other culture group are prepared for this kind of thing. We Jews are not strangers to adversity. We've all lived with it, both in our own lives, and we've inherited a 3,000-year tradition where we know through our history that we have been able to live through difficult times. And so I think there's a way to draw strength from that. We in my congregation, we teach a lot to the ideas of courage and bravery that come through living as a Jew. And that really goes back all the way to, Noah, the Torah, the earliest stories in Genesis. Here we have a God who picked Noah to go on to the ark and travel during a storm. And, the question was, why was it Noah? But we also saw that, Noah went on to that ark with animals and food and family. And so we can see that Noah was prepared for the storm. So I think that, as Jewish people, we are attuned to the idea of preparing ourselves. This has been different for sure. But, I like to think of the Jewish people, as one of the cultures that, our best days are in the future. And I think that, that's a big part of our ritual DNA, our cultural DNA. Elijah comes to every single Seder. He is the seat of hope. And, the way that we have our rituals, the way that we observe namings, bar and bat mitzvahs, weddings, the way that we call the generations to participate in everything that happens, in new lives and children and grandchildren, that gives a sense of the idea of continuity of life. And I think that for Jewish families, that is an area that we can draw strength from during a time like this. Obviously, there's more to say about it. I think about it on a personal level all the time. But I think that as Jewish people, we are attuned to be more prepared than other groups. And I think as athletes, it actually, speaks even more to the truth that, we're all athletes here, and we love sport, and we're all competing or have competed at very high levels. And that takes a tremendous amount of time and focus and preparation. So I think that we can draw strength from those things.
So thanks for that. Everyone, though, as far as optimism, people are trying to make believe they're being optimistic, but it's so hard to be optimistic in these times. That things are so crazy in our country for many different reasons, in addition to the coronavirus. How do you suggest that people become more positive in these crazy times?
Well, last weekend we celebrated Rosh Hashanah. So, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of something new. It's a chance to reset, it's a chance to renew, and it's also a chance to reflect on our lives. That's a gift to all of us because it comes every single year. How do you teach someone to be optimistic? I think the first thing that one must learn and know is that optimism is something that can be learned. It's not necessarily something that a person is born with, but it is a character strength that can be learned and developed. I don't know if there is one singular way to develop optimism, but in Jewish tradition, one good way to think about being optimistic is to fall back on a couple of very important kind of statements that have guided us for a long time. And I remember growing up, my grandmother always used to say, "This too shall pass." That no matter what was going on in our lives, she would often say, "This too shall pass." And that was always very helpful to me when I was a child growing up, no matter whatever challenge I was facing. If I came in and I was, crying or in need of some emotional support, grandma was there to say, "This too shall pass." I think that's an important thing to remember, and that inspires optimism. And then the other idea that, comes from tradition is the idea of gam ze l'tova, that also this was for good. That is sometimes difficult to understand in the moment, how a challenging, dark, depressing moment, as you described, that we're going through right now, how could any of that lead to good? But Jewish tradition teaches that gam ze l'tova, that God has everything in mind and it is for good. So whether or not those are truths, it's nice to believe that everything is for good and that this too shall pass. That can certainly soothe us and add to our optimism as we're facing any challenge.
Well, one of the things we've learned through this is that we are good at adapting. Everyone has adapted. We as an organization haven't seen the Maccabiah moved out one year. We've adapted. We've changed things. People have learned to deal with this. And I do think that's one of the positive things that came out of this. Certainly, no one's ever going to complain if a meeting gets moved from one day to another again, because I think this puts a lot of things in perspective. So one of the things I'd like to talk about tonight is that, if you can't see it, Rabbi Darren's written a book called Positive Judaism for a Life of Well-Being and Happiness. And I happen to turn to page 26, which says, "Never become the president of a major Jewish organization." I should have read this first, Darren. So tell us a little bit about what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, if you get to page 27, 28, 29, 30, and basically carry on till the end of the book, it says that on every single page. I had always, been raised on the ideas of trying to, create positivity in the world through behaviors, through actions, and through thoughts. That was kind of a theme in our home growing up. And when I came to the East Coast for seminary, my experience of Jewish life was different. For a lot of reasons. But the inspiration for the book really came about 6 years ago when I was giving a sermon one Friday night. And this was after a terrible car accident that I had been in a month before, and I was kind of describing both the accident and also the recovery. And out of my mouth, completely unplanned, I said the phrase positive Judaism. And when I speak to our congregation on Friday nights, I often speak extemporaneously. And so I just, took that thread and started talking about positive Judaism and imagining what that idea could be. After the service was over at our Oneg Shabbat, a woman who was in her early 80s, she came as a guest of someone. She came up and said to me, "Rabbi, I am 80 years old. My parents are Holocaust survivors. I am a psychotherapist and been working in New York my entire career, and I can tell you one thing. There is nothing positive about Judaism." And she was speaking her truth. Of course, I have a different idea about Judaism. When someone hears the phrase positive Judaism, often they think immediately of the idea of like happy Judaism or Judaism that is soft or light. But it's not really what positive Judaism is. Positive Judaism is a new vision for Jewish life. It's not a movement. We already have great movements in the world today: the Reform movement, the Conservative movement, Reconstructionism, Orthodoxy, and all different branches of those official movements. And positive Judaism is not trying to be a movement. Positive Judaism is rather a lens in which we can see the world through however we are observing Jewish practice and ritual, but with the specific idea in mind that we should be moving towards positivity and well-being, and that it really boils down to the question: if Judaism is not promoting well-being in a person's life, in their family's life, or their community, or even the world, or if a Jewish experience is not adding positivity to someone's life, helping them grow as people, giving them an experience that is uplifting, then what are we doing as Jews? And what is the future of the religious aspect of Jewish life? And so positive Judaism is an attempt to help people from all different types of Jewish backgrounds and others to see the value in participating in Jewish life from a positive perspective.
So how long did it take you to complete the book and come up with the material?
Oh, that's a good question, Jeff, from author to author. Well, I am grateful every day to my editor. I turned in the first draft of my book in about 7 months, and I wrote it like a disciplined athlete. My kids are of the age where they spend the summer at summer camp. They go to Camp Eisner up in Great Barrington. So I dropped them off on Sunday, and I drove straight to the airport in Hartford and flew to Denver, Colorado. And then I got into a rental car and drove it to Boulder, because Boulder is known as one of the best places to live in the country. That in terms of the rankings on well-being and happiness, Boulder always is in the top few. And so I flew to Boulder in the summer of 2018, rented a small room, and I got to work. And I was very disciplined. Jeff, you'd be impressed. I woke up every day at 5 a.m. and I wrote. I left at 10 to go take a long walk, work out, do yoga, take a swim. I'd be back at my desk at 1. I wrote till 4. I did the same thing again, stay loose, had a little dinner, and then I was back at it by 7 o'clock. Very regimented. And I turned in that draft to the editor, and Dina wrote me back and said, "Thank you. This was a really nice attempt at positive Judaism. But I'm not sure if your ideas yet are honed like they need to be for writing a book." So Dina and I spent about a year together working out more of the concepts, and then it was published at the end of 2019.
So when I wrote my book, it was very episodic. My editor gave me different ideas, and I really didn't know where it was going on this journey. It sort of had an epiphany, and it turned out okay, but that was by luck. When you were writing your book, was that the way you did it? You had different ideas, or did you know where it was going, or did along the way did something change and take you in a certain direction?
Well, there is a very rich body of literature now on positive psychology and the science of well-being. And when I was in seminary, I learned about this program in New York it was a Doctor of Ministry program, and I was interested in doing that after seminary. And while I was there, part of the curriculum was learning different modalities in psychology, and we learned about this man who had recently created something called positive psychology. He was based at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. His name was Marty Seligman. And I was interested in his books and his theories. And right around the time I was telling you about that car accident, I began to revisit some of the ideas of positive psychology. He wrote a book called Authentic Happiness. And when I came out of that, when I came back from the hospital after my accident, that's basically what I had in mind. I was searching for authentic and real happiness. But as I reviewed that book again, I realized that most of his themes actually had direct parallels in Jewish thought and in Jewish living. So when you ask about the structure of the book and in terms of episodes, I really found some core principles in positive psychology, mostly the domains of well-being, such as the domains of well-being are things like health and work, people's relationship to money, people's relationship to their community. And so I basically took the core structures of positive psychology and wrote to those ideas from a Jewish perspective and came up with 10 Jewish rituals and 10 Jewish values that really support the research of the science of well-being. And that ultimately is what Positive Judaism, at least at the book, tries to articulate.
When you mentioned someone had parents who were Holocaust survivors, my mom was a Holocaust survivor, and her brother, my Uncle Bob, who's still alive, also a Holocaust survivor. He was 16 at the time. And your book is called Positive Judaism, but I can tell you, my Uncle Bob, after the Holocaust, he found nothing positive about Judaism. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, I said this, it sounds to me like what Uncle Bob was feeling was something similar to what the, psychologist told me at that Friday night Shabbat dinner at the Oneg. And it's very understandable why someone would not feel positive about Judaism, or even more so like Uncle Bob, that there's nothing positive about Judaism. And Judaism often, I find, becomes the container or the holder for people's emotions and their areas of loss and their trauma. And on a deep level, they ask, couldn't Judaism save me from my trauma? If it's such a wonderful tradition, and I had such a difficult life experience, how come Judaism couldn't show me the light? And of course, that's very real. And sometimes Judaism, as a container, fails people, especially people who went through something like your Uncle Bob did. That is the kind of trauma that can really derail a life. But it doesn't necessarily just need to be the Holocaust. The grandmother that I was telling you about, who, when I was a child, said, "This too shall pass," when I became a teenager, she faced her own trauma when one of her sons died in a motorcycle accident. And she no longer said, "This too shall pass." And I'm not sure if there was really anything that could help my grandmother at that point recover from the death of a child. So there are things I think in a life that that are just too painful, and she never said that Judaism, couldn't offer her anything, or that it wasn't positive. I think for her, the meaning of life, the question was not, is Judaism worth participating in? It's really, what is the meaning of life anymore? And those are difficult things for a person to try to wrestle with, especially when they've dealt with such a trauma like that.
Very tough. So writing this book, has it changed the way that you teach?
It's changed my entire life. Not only how I teach, but how I am as a person in the world. I once had a professor at seminary who said when he had a big question, he would write a book. And when I think back to Positive Judaism as a book, I think my question was, can this tradition speak to happiness and well-being and positivity? And if it can, how can it? And what can we do as Jewish leaders or people in Jewish thought to help frame it in a way that is understandable and accessible to a general reader?
Can you break it down for us as to why it changed, how it changed your life? That's a pretty broad statement. I'd like to know exactly what some of the particulars are.
Well, that's a very good question. Is that Victor who's asking the question?
That's me.
Hi, Victor. It has helped me in so much as to better understand in my own life experience day-to-day living and day-to-day well-being. I guess that I never had a really good framework for dealing with frustrations and disappointments, both in my own life and in the lives of the families that I would witness at Tamid, and how they would react to certain experiences. And so it has helped me. I'll give you an example. Okay, Victor, let me give you an example because it happened to me this week. I parked my car on the street in New York City, and I have for many years. I'm not sure if you know what it's like to park a car in New York City, but it's a challenge. It's also part of a game because you need to learn how the different sides of the streets work, and you're always trying to avoid getting a ticket. So, I've learned how that works. I've been parking my car on the street for a long time. Tuesday morning, when I went out at 11 a.m. to sit in my car so that I wouldn't get a ticket, I walked out and there were 3 police officers in their cars, lights flashing. And the night before, every single car on that block had their windows smashed. Everyone who walked out to play the game of moving their car at 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning came to a car that had the front window smashed. So there was vandalism. I live on the Upper West Side of New York. So I was observing not only my own reaction, but how everybody else is reacting to this. And the reactions were everything from, this city is terrible. The cops don't do anything. I hate living here anymore. I knew that I shouldn't have parked my car here. Some people just waited their turn to fill out their police report. It was a really interesting moment to just witness people's reactions to the unexpected and how they react to fear because they felt a threat, I'm sure. 5 or 6 years ago, I would have been part of the chorus of people, hands in the air, how come the city couldn't have protected my car? What's going on in the world? Angry at politicians.
Why me?
Why me?
Yeah.
But on Tuesday morning, I said, you know what? It happens. People who park their car in cities, sometimes their windows do get smashed because there is vandalism in the world, and that's a reality. And for whatever reason on that morning, it just didn't get to me. So that's a little bit of a narrative to explain to you how the work of Positive Judaism has affected my life. And that's one scenario. And there are a lot of others, but that's something that happened to me this week.
Wow.
Very, very interesting. Have you, has the book done well? Are you happy with, has it met expectations?
Well, to be quite honest, Jeff, I don't follow the sales of the book. And I never count how many people came to a Shabbat service. Because those aren't the kind of questions that are important to me. It was a meaningful experience to write the book. It's a product that I'm very proud of. When I do speak to people who have read it, it seems like it's made a positive impact in their lives. And that to me is what's important. It helped me answer a big question. That was also one of the goals of the book. And I think that it will continue over a lifetime to answer other questions that come to all of us in the future. Thank you, Victor, for asking me that question.
You're welcome.
So let's go in a different direction here, Rabbi Darren. Let's talk about your Maccabiah journey. Tell us how you got involved with us and where you started, and now that you're the official rabbi of the organization.
Well, I want to say hi to Ron Carner, because Ron was the president at the time, the chairperson, when I was an athlete. And I've gotten to know Ron well over the last 20 years. And Ron, you are looking well. It's nice to see you tonight. Happy New Year. Hope that you and Talia are doing well. I played volleyball for 2 years in college, and I sat on the bench the entire time. Now, you can't tell because I'm on Zoom, but I'm about 6'4", and growing up in Southern California, I was always pegged to do those things that tall people do, like basketball and volleyball. And in high school, I was a pretty good volleyball player. In college, I was an okay volleyball player. And then I heard about these tryouts that were happening at the Bren Center at UCLA for the Israel Olympics. At least that's what I thought it was, right? That's what you kind of like put together when you're in your early 20s. So this is terrific. I'm the tallest Jew I know. I'm the only athletic Jew I know. This is going to be a total slam dunk. I'm going to get to go to Israel and compete. So I showed up at the Bren Center at UCLA probably in the late winter of 1997. And I walked in thinking I was hot stuff. And there were about 80 or 90 other guys, real Division I volleyball players. I mean, real athletes. And I was basically ready to turn around and go home. They had all the big names on their sweatsuits from the West Coast, all the clubs. And so I went home after tryouts that day and thought that was a terrific experience. There is no way I made the team. So I went home ready for my next big adventure. About 4 months later, I am now on a kibbutz learning Hebrew, getting ready to start my first year of rabbinical school. And my phone rings, or the phone on the kibbutz rings, about 2:30 a.m. Someone comes and knocks on my door. I'm like, I go to the phone, and here's what I receive on the other end. Hello, Darren. This is Mike Spector. I'm the volleyball chair for the United States Maccabiah team, and I want to congratulate you for making the team. I thought he was someone was pulling a prank on me. But as it turns out, it was the real deal. So I flew back to the States for training camp. Weeks later, I was back in Israel and again found myself riding the bench. But I was so excited to be on the bench. And at the time I was, it was kind of known that I was the guy on the team who was getting ready to go to rabbinical school. And so we were in our final match. We were playing Colombia for the bronze medal. And I had maybe, of the 6 or 8 games or matches leading up to that, I had a great time warming up. Let's just put it like that. So there we are. It's the 3rd game. We're dominating Colombia. And all of a sudden, from the crowd, the chant begins. Put the rabbi in! Put the rabbi in! You can imagine how excited I was. So I got in. I just happened to, rotate in on service. And I looked over at the coach and he gave me that look. You know that look, Jeff, that coaches give when they don't trust their players. I got that look. But thank God, God was on my side. The ball went in and I rotated around a couple times and then got pulled out. But that was a real high moment. And so that was kind of how the Maccabiah experience began. And I guess that was, more than 20 years ago. I can't believe it because it truly does feel like it was yesterday.
The years, they fly. So how do you view who is a Jew? Because, we run into this issue in Maccabi World Union. There's a lot of other countries that are much stricter than we are.
Oh, and Jeff, can't we just, stick on what happened to my car this week? We have to get into such a difficult question about.
We can go back to that. So if you want to avoid, we could go on to the next question if you want.
Well, you want to, well, I told you before the program began, Jeff, that I would take on any question you wanted to ask me. But when it comes to Jewish identity, I always defer to the expert on the call, and that's Ron Karner. I'm just going to defer to Ron to answer the question about who is a Jew.
Unmute, Ron. Okay. So Rabbi, when we're going to be going to Israel in 2022,
He's getting on.
Are you on? He's connecting. I think Ron is delinquent in his bills with Optimum or something.
I'll tell you what, Jeff. I think that
I'm on. I think I'm on.
I think you have an interesting question. Let's let Ron jump in first, if that's okay with you.
Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I didn't expect this, but I find it very interesting that you should ask. What is a Jew? Well, it depends upon if you're talking about from a Maccabiah perspective, it's one thing. If you're talking about it from perspective perhaps of family and community, it might be something else. And perhaps from the Bible, it could be something else. But I, as the former president of Maccabi USA, I think I can only speak from that perspective, from Maccabi USA perspective in regard to who can participate in the Maccabiah. So we've always had a philosophy within the organization that we wanted to be as inclusive as possible to those who who made the team. So we always felt that it was important that we had guidelines. So we did have guidelines. We do have guidelines. I know that the Australians have a guideline that says if your mother's not Jewish, no matter what you are, you're not Jewish. Your mother married a Jewish man, and you, even though you went through the whole process, you're not Jewish because your mother isn't Jewish. Well, that has not been Maccabi USA's point of view. Our point of view has been that that if your parents are Jewish, yes, that's so, or you might have had a parent that converted to Judaism, and you grew up as a Jewish person, you were bar mitzvahed, you do celebrate the Passover, and you do celebrate the holidays, and you consider yourself Jewish and you do not consider yourself something else, that at that point you would qualify within our guidelines. However, we've had situations where we've had athletes who wanted to become part of a team, but they didn't have and everybody had to go through the process in regards to the application process as to who was allowed who qualified as a Jew. So I'll never forget the story about Porter Wiley. Porter Wiley III wanted to become a member of the USA rugby team. And Porter Wiley III filled out the application that his father was Jewish, but he did not qualify because he said that he was not Jewish, did not grow up to be Jewish, but his father was Jewish. So we've decided that Porter Wiley III was not able to become a member of the team, even though he wanted to become a member of the USA rugby team at that time was, I think, ranked the second or third best rugby program in the United States. So in regards to that question, Rabbi, I can only give you from the perspective of our program, of our organization. But thank you for asking.
Good to hear your voice, Ron.
So, Rabbi Darren, back when I started in '81, we were a one-dimensional Jewish Olympics. That's it. We went for 2 weeks. You won a medal. You got a sweatsuit. You didn't win a medal, whatever. And then it morphed into where we started adding some culture and education and really making it meaningful. And it's sort of unbelievable that 30 years ago, all I thought about it was just winning medals, just another competition that I had to go to and win. I never even comprehended that there was something so much bigger. Here I am now that I understand that it's not about the medals, although it's unofficially we want to win the medals too. How do you see the importance of what it is we do for young Jewish athletes, actually Jewish athletes of all ages?
Well, I think it has the potential to be life-changing. That certainly is the case with me. I think the question boils down to is the perspective of our organization, an organization to send athletes to Israel to compete, or is it an organization that sends Jews to Israel for an athletic competition? And are we more interested in athleticism or Judaism? Is the question about winning medals or winning hearts? And I think it probably can be both. A lot of it also has to do with the frame or the mindset that the athlete enters the process with. But from an organizational point of view, I think that we have an incredible opportunity for this to be a transformative experience Jewishly. And I know that you share that, Jeff. So the first week that we're all together and we tour Israel, I think that's a profound week. I think it's probably hard to absorb for any one individual what's really happening during that week. It takes time, and but what you're creating is memory. And from all of my the members of my team, from everyone who I've spoken to over the years who've participated, it's one of the greatest experiences of their lives. And so I think that we have a real opportunity to take people places that they may not have anticipated going, at least Jewishly and spiritually, when they first got engaged in the process. Then there's work to be done, just not only with the athletes, but also with the coaches, since so often it's the coach who also really influences the experience of their team and their players. So it's a wonderful opportunity. And boy, I'm just so glad that Marshall is in place, because I know that, that Marshall, because he's a Jewish professional and has such a deep love for Judaism and really understands the pressures of this model athletics or Jewish identity, there's really nobody better to be guiding this organization in 2020 than a person like Marshall Einhorn.
I'll second that. Working with Marshall it's been wonderful. Wonderful person. Rabbi Darren, one of the things you brought up was about the coaches. You hit on something. At summer camp, we always used to say that the counselors made the summer. They set the tone. And I feel very strongly for our team, it's the coaches. And I'll be candid with you. Some of our coaches really don't get it. They think it's 100% winning medals and training. And some of them, I'm afraid, don't even buy into the rest of it. And we try very, very hard to get the right coaches who will really make the experience great for the athletes, and not just from a standpoint of winning the gold medal. It's much more than that. The Israel Connect component was really a very big thing for us. That really is the flagship of our portfolio. And do you ever think about what your message is going to be to the team when you speak to them?
Well, I think that when we're all together in Israel, I think we're going to be able to just take one gigantic deep breath. And I think the message is going to be a message of unity. And I think that we are all going to be dealing with at that point, because it's going to be a signal to us that we kind of have passed through this liminal state of coronavirus. So it's going to, in a lot of ways, be in our rearview mirror, even if it's close up in our rearview mirror. But I think that people will feel like survivors if they're in Israel. And I think that the message really needs to be how to take this group of people and move them from feeling like they are survivors to helping them reimagine their lives of being more than just a survivor, but being someone who is going to thrive in the world, and how they can use this experience being together in this global meeting to move them from survive to thrive. I think leaders should be thinking about that right now, because I think that's going to be an important message to develop in people once we are living lives that are a little bit more normal than what we're experiencing today.
Thank you very much for that. Boy, that was a good one off the cuff. I think right now is a really good time to open up the floor for some interactive question and answer. If anyone has some questions they would like to ask Rabbi Darren, unmute yourself and just raise your hand, and I'll call on you. Anyone want to ask some questions? Yes, Dorit, you want to unmute yourself, please?
Hi, how you doing, Rabbi?
Hi, Dorit.
Hi. I actually was just a rabbi in Kuwait with the U.S. Army in the past year. As a lifetime athlete, I notice sometimes there is a lot of good athletes, really like to go to the Jewish Olympic Maccabiah, which is once every 4 years for many, many years, and they don't have the funding. We're talking about really national, U.S. national level sport who don't have money prizes. So they're good athletes, Jewish, faithful, and everything else. And then you can see other athletes who really not going to do any sports a lot of time behind even if it's 12th grade or a little after college, they just go to life. My question is any way we can do funding to those athletes that fall out the crack and years, Maccabiah after Maccabiah after Maccabiah just cannot raise the money, and they would love to do that. A lot of athletes, their dream is maybe make the Olympics. Very, very hard to make the Olympics. It's almost incredible how rare actually walk on the open ceremony in the Olympics, but as a substitute, it would be really nice for athletes like that to walk in the Maccabiah, which is I think it's the fourth sport event, the biggest sport event in the world.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you raised a really important point, Dorit. It is such an important international gathering of athletes. Um, you know, I can just tell you a little bit anecdotally, only because I have been to a few meetings where the very question you're asking is the topic of the meeting. That it's on the agenda of the organization to figure out how to bring more and more athletes who want to compete to have the experience. But in terms of the details, in terms of how to get the funding into an individual athlete's hands, that is really not something that I'm involved in. But I echo what you're saying and how important it is to try to make it available to as many young athletes as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Jeff, you can tell them about the scholarship program that's been available for the last several Maccabiah through the application process. It's been very important. So I think last games we funded well over $1 million to help bring athletes.
So Dorit, we did about $1.1 million last time in 2017. About 3/4 of it was for need-based athletes, and we had a Yachad relief committee that really did a great job. We know it's very expensive. Some people in our organization would like to lower the cost across the board. Someday, if we win the lottery, maybe we'll do that. But until we get to that stage, our goal is to provide as much scholarship as we can for need-based athletes. Also elite athletes, but I consider that secondary. I'd rather have more money for the need-based. Isaac Greenbaum, you had a question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and meet with everyone. And so I'm an athlete. I'm also the son of Holocaust survivors, and I got married in Jerusalem to my Israeli wife. And I have a real strong connection to both Judaism and Israel, but I'm secular, right, in nature and in practice. And there are times within the Maccabi community that I feel kind of like a second-class Jew, honestly, leaning into my vulnerability, that, I'm not Jewish enough. So I wanted to talk with you and everyone here about that and how we, come together as a community using sport as basically our baseline, right? That's why we're here, but also as Jews, as all kinds of Jews, and how that, how that works and how maybe sometimes it doesn't.
Well, thank you, Isaac, for sharing that. I think that is, as you said, comes from a vulnerable place. I think it's never comfortable to admit that you feel like a second-class anything, especially within an organization that you love. So I think that is something that is real. I think that that athleticism is the baseline within this organization, which is something that can be shared independent of a person's religious practices, their religious beliefs, their feelings about God, their feelings about Torah, or even peoplehood. I would encourage those who are, taking the topic of who's a Jew, what does it mean to be able to come onto the team, to also take this kind of question on, which is, how do we broaden the tent as wide as we possibly can before the tent collapses? When I think of a tent, I think of many pathways in. How and in what way your experience in Maccabiah USA has led you to feel like a second-class citizen, I think is probably something more than we can take on at this moment. However, I want to just echo how complicated it is today to be Jewish in the world. And whatever you're feeling about Maccabiah USA as being the container for being a second-class Jew. I think that it's just difficult to not feel like you fit into one of the major movements, especially at a time like this. Because so much of the Jewish experience right now is oriented towards the religion of the high holidays, and if one doesn't feel a way into that or feel connected, that it does feel like you're on the edge and maybe there's not a place for you. What comes to mind right now is my father's experience of Judaism. He was not a Holocaust survivor. I was telling you that he's a dentist and a scientist. But on Yom Kippur every year, which was the only year that he would drive to the synagogue, not only would he not drive to the synagogue on any other day, he just wouldn't go. But on Yom Kippur, he drove to the synagogue. He drove to make sure that me and my sister and my mom had access to religion, the religious side of Judaism. And he was a big financial supporter of our congregation. But instead of ever going into the sanctuary on Yom Kippur, he sat in his car and read Scientific America and waited for us. So feelings of being not part of, even when you are a Jew, I think transcends generations. And it's complicated to be a Jew in the world today. So, my only hope for you is that Maccabi USA does eventually feel like a place that can hold you.
Thank you for that. I believe yes, and there's an opportunity there for everyone to be not only more inclusive, but find their way together. And I think that's an initiative that would be helpful in being both inclusive to everyone that's already here and continue the outreach, for others.
Yeah. That's well said, Isaac. Thank you for asking that question and putting that onto our conversation topics tonight.
Thanks, Isaac. And I promise you for the next games, I will do everything possible to get you an extra pack of pins to make you feel included. So any other questions for Rabbi Darren? So yes, Marty Bloom, welcome. Can you please unmute yourself? How you doing, Marty?
Complaints. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Very good. My Brooklyn accent. I grew up, my wife and I raised our kids in Westchester. It was an Orthodox or conservative synagogue with an Orthodox rabbi who happened to be the rabbi at Sing Sing prison, which was terrific. He used to say he was an Orthodox rabbi with a conservative synagogue with a Reform congregation. All the things that I've seen, how Judaism, and this is a question for the rabbi, the movement from when we started even there, women, not only couldn't they read from the Torah, but weren't allowed on the bima. Religion, if you were married out of the religion, your spouse was not permitted in the synagogue. In my own case, my uncle married, and Uncle Leon's name was never spoken again. And then just recently, the last couple of years, about gay marriage. So my question about all this, how Judaism, at least that I've seen, moved so I think pretty rapidly, acceptance, and I think for the young people particularly, that's what I believe in, the element of change. Yet I find in Israel, where we're going to be going and we'll be there for a long time, relatively long time, the right wing is controlling things I feel just the reverse, which doesn't seem to make sense. And I can tell you one experience we had in Berlin in 2015. We had that Shabbat dinner for 3,000 people, and it was so wonderful. And I think people miss out by not having these various experiences. So I was curious about your feeling of that.
Well, you raise a very interesting question, Marty. I think it's an important question, especially in the world that we're living in today. to the idea of how religion or how Judaism has evolved pretty rapidly from the time that you were describing when, women weren't allowed on the bima, and if someone, in the congregation married a non-Jew, how they were no longer welcome. I think, at least I want to hope that we've learned from those experiences of the past. I was asked the question in my first interview, just being a newly minted rabbi, will I perform interfaith marriages? And I did not at the time. As it turns out, that was also the policy of the senior rabbi of that congregation. I was only in that congregation for 3 years. This was from 2002 to 2005. Within 3 years, the policy of the congregation changed because it became so apparent that a huge percentage of families that were participating in Jewish life and had Judaism as their singular religion in their home, that one of the parents wasn't Jewish. So I think the question, at least for the committees that were thinking about interfaith marriages and were the rabbis going to be encouraged, or in this case, allowed to do them, I think the question was less about, should we be doing this, but more, do we have a choice? And what does it mean for us in the 21st century to be a welcoming congregation that cares for humanity, but that has such obvious limitations on who can participate, and what does it mean to be on the floor of the congregation or in the rafters? And these are complex questions. And I think that a lot of them have to do with how a Jewish person or how a Jewish community feels about authority and who has the authority. So these are big questions, Marty. I don't know if that anecdote that I shared with you, spoke to what your question is, but the nature of change is very real in Judaism. And I think those of us who are charged to continue to work within the tent, but also to continue to expand the tent, these are the questions that are constantly at top of mind.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions for Rabbi Darren before we wrap up the evening? Anyone?
I think Rob Pierce has a question. Rob?
Rob, no? Okay. So, Rabbi Darren, I just want to say thank you so much for this evening, of your warmth, your candor, your insightful comments. And is there anything that you would like to leave us with that you haven't already said?
Well, I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. It's hard to show up in a virtual space. So many options. It's nice to visit with everybody. I want to wish everyone a very happy new year. Hope that you and all your loved ones are sealed for a good year in the book of life. For that we say Gemar Chatima Tova. This is an organization that requires us to really cherish at a time when we're looking around the Jewish community and seeing places that are closing their doors. This is the kind of organization I think that needs to be seen within all of our lives, and within the larger Jewish community as one of those organizations that has longevity in its sites. And so for that, I want to thank Marshall and Dan and Mackenzie and the staff down in Philadelphia. I want to say hi to Jay Kurtz. You must be Dan's mom. It's great to see you, Jay. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi, I have to tell you, I sympathize with you. I grew up in Queens, And I remember well alternate side of the street parking.
Well, well, thank you for sympathizing with me, Jay. And if you ever want to come back and return to that, sitting with the car while street cleaners pass you, the invitation is open. For everybody else, I just want to say, Jeff, thank you for inviting me to join you all this evening. I want to thank Ron for inviting me to be part of the organization years ago. And Jeff, thank you for that call now 4 years ago to invite me to be the team rabbi for this round. That's a great honor for me. So happy to see everybody, and want to again wish everybody a very happy New Year.
Thank you so much.